Hello, good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. I'm quite a regular visitor to the Worldwide Wednesday, and I am also going to share my screen a little bit as soon as I find the right button. And actually, I'm going to start off with something from my old job. Tell me, can you see my screen yet?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fab. So I've been with Citizens Advice for 3 years now, but I started off in the EUSS project and in the settlement, what is now the settlement team. And it's such a thrill to be with my colleagues, Beth and Anthony, because as you can see, there's quite a lot of work that's been done. And I just thought I'd show you all these flyers again, because you've probably all seen them at some point when I've brought them to Worldwide Wednesday. But a year ago, I moved across to a different project, which is the Access to Justice project. We have a website to go with that, and the Access to Justice project started out life in 2020 as a partnership between Citizens Advice Liverpool, Liverpool City Council, which provided the funding, and the University of Liverpool. And actually, I'm going to make you cast your mind even further back to 2012, because that's really where the problems that the project seeks to address started. In 2012, the government introduced a piece of legislation called LASPO. It's the Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act. And as a result of that, it caused a 75% reduction of legal aid provision. Now, the government had this idea that people's problems would either just disappear, dissolve into thin air, just as if by magic, or people would find some other solutions to their problems. But actually, what we've seen is quite the opposite. That, together with welfare reforms and austerity policies, meant that people were actually prevented from accessing justice, and their problems became worse. So we see that you have this cluster of problems. You know, if you have, let's say, a problem with your landlord, there's disrepair that might cause you some health problems. The health problems cause you disruption to your work, you lose your job, you don't have an income, you can't pay the rent, then you'll be evicted, then you'll be homeless. Things will become worse and worse and worse. So in 2018, some research conducted by the University of Liverpool was published by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And this report on the impact of LASPO made some recommendations to the government. I leave it up to your imagination how many of these recommendations the central government actually implemented. However, Liverpool City Council was persuaded that maybe, you know, people become destitute, that becomes their problem. So maybe they should invest something to break these cycles. So the council funded the Access to Justice project in order to mitigate the worst effects of LASPO. And initially it was funded just for 1 year, with the funding starting in March 2020. So the project management had to very quickly reassess what they were doing and actually slightly change things around due to the pandemic. So the aims of this partnership work were to provide a strong evidence base on the social impact of legal aid cuts and welfare reform in Liverpool. So this is the research that was conducted by the University of Liverpool, and the rest of the project was then delivered by Citizens Advice Liverpool, mainly creating and developing a referral and training capacity for Liverpool's third and advice sector, and therefore increase the access to advice for Liverpool residents. So there's a link there, and I'll put it in the chat maybe later as well, to the Equality and Human Rights Commission on the impact of LASPO on routes to justice. So the university conducted a mapping exercise to get a really good understanding of the advice services that were or are available to people in Liverpool. Of course, this landscape of advice isn't geography, and it changed very rapidly, especially due to what was going on in 2020 due to the pandemic and lockdowns and services having to close, you know, having to shut down their premises, and therefore not being able to see clients not being able to access them. They also developed a referral network, and there is actually a separate electronic system whereby organizations can refer to each other, and they developed a wider network that is just a community of interest, a community of practice of organizations that give advice. And it started with a core of legal advice providers, but when some funding was found for the second year, the council decided to give continuation funding. That's when I moved across to this project, and we then added more support organizations to supplement what the legal advice providers are doing. And we continued with the training and skills maximization, and we do that by having monthly meetings. And also we increase the conversations that organizations are having with each other and the partnership working, which means they can now share their data and conduct more and more research on access to justice. So let's think about how this is organized from the point of view of a client, of somebody who has a problem. First of all, they have to understand and recognize and identify that they have a legal problem. And that very often is, that's the most important first step. As they say, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. And that first step is really crucial. And very often people don't recognize that actually this is a problem that you need legal advice for. You need to know what the law says. And the next issue, of course, is where do I ask for advice? Where do I go to get advice? And when you then kind of find out where to go, you need a referral to that place. You might be able to self-refer, but you might need to be referred in. And then finally, you need to get the correct advice. So we've got these 3 stages. So you can think of this as a service model of legal advice. And if you cast your mind back to the cycle of problems, it doesn't matter where you intervene. You can interrupt it at any point, and it will be beneficial no matter how far things have gone. You can always improve the situation. You can always add some good quality advice, maybe legal advice, but maybe also some non-legal advice, maybe just some emotional support, and it will make a positive impact. So clients need information and assistance. They might get referred off to non-legal but paralegal services, or they might see actual lawyers. If there is a legal case to be made, and if say it's something that goes to a court or to tribunal, then they might need representation. But actually, out of the kind of cases that we see clients needing advice with, it's only a small fraction that actually ultimately needs representation. A lot can be resolved earlier on. So I've already alluded to it, obviously, during 2020 and also 2021, because of the pandemic, because of COVID-19, there was a huge increase in demand, but also services had to go remote. They had to become more digitalized, which brings problems in itself. Beth has already alluded to the digital barriers that people are facing. So it's fine for those people who can access information and advice digitally, but for those who have got digital barriers, it's a problem. And coming out of lockdowns and coming out of having these restrictions, we found obviously a lot of locations had to be closed, and many did not reopen. So the answer then, or the step forward, is to think in terms of co-location of services. So for example, the way in which Citizens Advice Liverpool is now providing advice in libraries, but also giving more skills and more training to people who are volunteers in, for example, food banks or in the pantries, so that they can appropriately refer to other advice organizations. So in the last 2 years, the network has grown. I think when I started a year ago, we had 27 organizations. We now have 77 organizations. They are represented by 167 individuals. There are 10 legal advice providers who either are funded by legal aid or give pro bono advice. So these are not, you know, organizations that charge the individuals. 3 universities, 4 law centers, 6 housing providers, and of course all the other advice and support organizations, some of which are really tiny, some of which are huge. So 23 of these organizations are also set up on the secure electronic referral system. And that is actually a platform that's used across the Liverpool City region, and altogether there are 53 organizations on it. And this means that when a referral is made, it's a hard referral. It's not just signposting. You're not telling a client to go see this other organization with their problem, but you're contacting the organization with the client's details, their name, their address, and a brief summary of what the problem is. And then that organization will contact the client. And the client doesn't have to go through that rigmarole of re-traumatizing themselves for telling the story of the problem again and again, and also not having to go through giving all the details from scratch every time. We also have monthly meetings, and we alternate between networking meetings and information sessions. So at a networking meeting, we have a spotlight on just a handful of organizations, and they give a service update for 5 to 10 minutes and tell everybody what they've been up to and what they've got going forward. And information sessions are always about each about a different topic. And all our sessions are also recorded and then available to members of the network on our website. There's a members area that people can sign up to. And you know, I'm not averse to members of the public signing up to that. If I don't recognize the email address, then they might get an email from me saying, why are you interested in joining this members area? And then we can have a conversation about that. We also have additional events. For example, last September, we organized a conference on the intersectionality between immigration and other advice areas, because as obviously Beth and Anthony have alluded to, last year in 2021, the UK's immigration system has seen the biggest overhaul in probably about 2 generations, probably since the 70s, with the EU settlement scheme, the rollout of the points-based immigration system, you know, the deadline to the EU settlement scheme, the Hong Kong B&O visa. So there were a lot of changes afoot, and obviously a lot of people now become subject to hostile environment policies that weren't previously subject to them. And I think it's also important to remember that, you know, actually all migrants share a lot, and a lot of the issues are the same for all migrants. It doesn't matter where they come from or on which scheme they are entering the UK. And it's very important to highlight that, and for us as migrants also to stand in solidarity with each other. So that was the conference last September, and now next Wednesday, I hope you will all join us in person at the offices of Shelter in Anfield, just off Breck Road at the Holy Trinity Church, for Global Liverpool, which will be an opportunity to celebrate our diverse cultures, to celebrate the roots that have brought us to Liverpool. There will be music, dancing, food, art, and in amongst all of these wonderful things that make life worth living and all the better, we will also have advice organizations that are there to help people even when they find problems in their lives. So as well as these events, our organizations are also working together and forming partnerships for collaborative funding bids, and also to submit evidence, for example, to consultations by the government. If you want to find out more, the website address, or the URL address, is there on the page, and I will put it in the chat later as well. And as I said, next week, please join us for Global Liverpool. It would be lovely to see you all there. Again, I'll put the Eventbrite link in the chat. And I think that's all from me. So I'll stop sharing there. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Leanne, maybe just to round things off.
Yeah, sure. Wow, lots of information there today. So just to recap then, I'll just remind everyone, we covered Beth Saunders, our settlement supervisor. She spoke about our EU settlement scheme, which is still available for people to access support for if they need to apply for the scheme. Anthony Books, our settlement advisor, spoke about the Hong Kong Welcome Programme. We are currently running that programme until the end of the month, waiting for confirmation of funding, hopefully until March of next year. So watch this space on that one. And then obviously Cosi Doerfel Hill is our partnership coordinator for the Access to Justice programme. And there's lots of ways you can engage with that programme. The best way really is probably to pop to the Global Liverpool next week and find out a lot more about it. So I think that's a good summary, and I guess there's not many people here, but opening up for questions really on any of the schemes that we have, or generally any questions you have about Citizens Advice Liverpool, I'd be happy to help and answer as well.